Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Golf News Podcast. And today we have a special guest joining us, a soon-to-be three-time Rhode Island Senior Player of the Year. It hasn't officially been announced yet, but the season's over and he's in the lead. So we're happy to have with us Darren Corrente. Darren, thanks so much for taking a few minutes to talk with us today.
Joe, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Talk about, obviously, like I said, you're going to win your third Senior Player of the Year. You had a good year, third place at the Senior Amateur, second at the Senior Mid-Am, or tie for second, I guess, the Senior Mid-Am. Going to win your third straight. What does that mean to you, and how important is it for you?
Well, I guess a couple of years back, it became a goal of mine to try to become the Player of the Year. Obviously, making the Tri-States is important, and if you're the Player of the Year, you're guaranteed a spot on the Tri-States. So yeah, I mean, I worked hard to try to keep my fitness up in my early 50s, and when it came time to try it on the senior circuit here in Rhode Island, I felt like I was pretty well positioned. Candidly, I think COVID had a beneficial effect for me. My clients were very much open to Zoom and Microsoft Teams and things like that. So I was able to do a little more practicing, which definitely helped. Mm-hmm. And it's an honor. I mean, the players are so good. I'm just thinking about some of the guys that you see in there every week. Bruce Hederick, Dean Parziale, who had like a couple of wins. I think last year, the year before. Susie Quigley. Those guys are all really solid players. I mean, they're good golfers. There's a lot of good golf out there. And yeah, so it's an honor. I'm really honored to have been able to do this now 3 years in a row.
And one of the great stories of the season, actually, and I know you mentioned bringing it up because you mentioned them, was Paul Quigley and Doc Perry making the cut at the actual Rhode Island Amateur. And then they gave, I forgot who they were each playing off the top of my head, but they gave the guys a run for their money in the first round. That was one of the great stories of the year in Rhode Island golf.
So it's funny, that golf course, Wanamatonamy, in the conditions that we played it in, heavy wind.
Brutal, yeah.
I want to say myself, Doc, Paul, did Susie make the cut? I think a bunch of the seniors did because it took a lot of patience, flighting your ball. I think things we did when we were younger that a lot of kids maybe don't do now. I think there were some really good players that were disappointed that they didn't make the cut. It was blowing for 2 straight days. I think I went afternoon, morning, and it was howling. Yeah, I ended up playing Kevin Blazer, another guy that I've become friendly with over the years, who played great. And I lost to him on the first round.
Well, then he went on to win the amateur, so at least you won.
He did.
So you lost to the
That's
champion.
Exactly what I told him. I said, now go win this so I can say I lost to the winner.
But yeah, it was crazy conditions down there especially obviously the first 2 days. And then it was funny that it calmed down the rest of the week. Like the match play was just like almost perfect conditions. I think they had rain kind of sort of one day, but it was
perfect. Course was in beautiful shape. They did a really nice job with it.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. I mean, that 11 was the 11th hole where you hit the tee shot and you walk down the hill and the water is behind the green.
Yeah, beautiful.
That's one of the coolest holes probably in the state, I would say. Yeah, in my opinion, but my opinion is worth nothing. So you've done all these things. When did you get the golf bug? When did it start for you? Tell about your kind of story growing up kind of in the game.
So when I was younger, say in my early teens, I used to like to skate, play hockey. I was tall for my age. I was probably almost this height when I was 14 or 15. So hockey, I was okay out there. And then everybody got so much bigger. I have a pretty slight build. And I remember waking up after getting checked into the boards at Mean Auditorium in the locker room with my father over me saying, I can't take you playing hockey anymore. He was a social member at Metacomet. So I was probably 14 when I started, maybe 13 when I first picked up a club. Used to go up to Smithfield driving range to see Guido. Everybody had their Lynx irons, and I started playing. I was okay, you know. I played a big hook. I was a dipper, and then my parents sent me to a Golf Digest school down at Pinehurst. Davis Love was there, and he really took an interest in me. And I spent a couple hours on my knees hitting knee drives to get the feel of not dipping. And I came back, and I started playing pretty well. I think probably my junior year, I made it to the quarters or semis of the juniors. I went to Providence Country Day. My father and Billy Andrade's father, Billy was obviously at Country Day, basically said we need to start a golf team. So the two of them were very instrumental in getting the golf team going. Billy would have left, obviously, if there was no golf team. And he was the one, and I was the two player our junior and senior year. And we had a lot of success. I mean, he was unbelievable. I mean, he had a killer instinct in match play. If he had a guy down 1 or 2, the match was over because he was going to get to 3 or 4. He just smelled blood, and he was just an unbelievable talent when he was young. He's still an unbelievable talent, but he was a crazy good talent when he was a kid.
And of course, he was just awarded the Payne Stewart Award, which is one of the most prestigious awards in probably all of golf.
Yeah.
I would say, and that was a really cool speech he gave, mentioning Rhode Island and kind of throwing it back to the olden days of talking about growing up here. And when you grew up with him, you've been good friends with Brad Faxon for a while. We'll get into that in a minute, but it's interesting. Because a couple of weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, I guess, I wrote an editorial talking about how important it is for the current crop of Rhode Island pros, including, the guys that just turned pro, and Will Dixon, Davis Chatfield, Chris Francoeur from URI, and then eventually Patrick Welch is going to turn pro within the next handful of months or whatever. But I was talking about how important it is for them to continue to push forward and kind of blaze a path, if you will, for Rhode Islanders, to show Rhode Islanders that, hey, you can get to the pros from Rhode Island. And it was interesting as I was thinking back to when Faxon and Andrade turned pro, and Brett Quigley for that matter as well. And you kind of were around them at that time. You knew them from when they were kids. But what was that like? And obviously it's different now. Turning pro is a bit more of a process. Some say it might be easier to turn pro now than it was back then, or get to the tour now. But what was that like from someone growing up with Faxon, Andrade? I don't know if you grew up with Quigley, but include him anyway. Just talk about that. What was that like to see them go pro? What was that whole time like? Because I think it's fascinating.
So Brett was a little younger. Brad was a little older. Billy was 1 year younger. So I would play, say, in the Rhode Island Juniors or some other tournament. There were a ton of tournaments back then. I was the New England Juniors up at Ponkapog. There's the Insurance Youth Classic. Billy, I think, won that when we were young. They just had a different skill set. You just saw it. The way and more around the green than anything. That's what you really, really noticed. Their ability to get up and down after a missed green was just so much far superior to anyone else in that age group. I was in the pro shop at Metacomet, and I had applied to Furman, not recruited or anything like that. I wasn't good enough, but Brad was there, and I said, "Hey, I got into Furman." He said, "You'll love it. Come down. I'll talk to the golf coach." So that conversation in the pro shop actually probably resulted more than anything in me going to Furman. Like I said, I never was quite good enough to be a traveler for that team. But watching them play, yeah, they just had an incredible ability. I remember watching Joe Benevento, Brad Faxon, Norm Lutz, and Mike Wirtis, who passed away a couple of years back, play at Metacomet. And Norm Lutz and Brad Faxon put on a putting display like you'd never seen. It almost looked fake. 20-foot putts like we make 3-foot putts. It was just unbelievable to watch them.
Wow.
Yeah, they were great. It's funny. I got off the topic. When I was younger, growing up at Metacomet, my first introduction to Metacomet was, as my father was a social member, Friday night dinner. My parents would take me to dinner. I would order. It was the bird cage, and I'd run out and putt. And two guys, Brad Oxnard and Al Fienza, always took an interest in the juniors. Metacomet was definitely a guy's place. It was a guy's club. And there weren't a lot of juniors around. But they always took an interest. And Oxnard, in particular, would watch me putt. I'd take my blazer off, because you had to wear a blazer even as a kid in that bird cage. I'd take it off and I would putt, and he would watch me or give me tips. Some of the old timers there were just amazing people. Him, like I said, Fienza, Tony Paolino Sr. really took an interest in the juniors. To this day, if I do well and I see him, he's always will say, nice work. And he's always so complimentary. And back in the day was Joe Benevento, and he would keep an eye on us. So yeah, the place was amazing.
Obviously, it's unfortunate and somewhat controversial as to what happened with Metacomet, but just talk about what was it. I mean, you talked about it a little bit when you were a kid, but what was like growing up and being in the heyday of Metacomet? Talk about what Metacomet's heyday was like, the tournaments, the stories that you can share, of course.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, their member guest, which was always the Sunday, it ended the Sunday of Father's Day, usually the Sunday of the U.S. Open. It was an 18-hole qualifier, and then you had to win 4 18-hole matches. Final on Father's Day. 64 teams, a waiting list, ton of caddies, huge Calcutta. It was unbelievable. I mean, growing up seeing that, you thought that was the norm. Then you quickly found out that it wasn't. And it was a marathon. It really was. I remember playing in it with a fellow by the name of Paul Davis, who was an old time guy he was a member of Newport, but he was from Texas. And he was a big gambler on the golf course down in Texas.
Oh boy.
And he played into his 70s when I took him. And I remember we lost in the finals. He's like, do not ask me to play in this thing again. This was way too much golf. But I took him the next year, and we ended up actually winning it the second time I took him. But he was a great competitor, but it was a marathon. The golf at all the tournaments, there was the Paquin. That was always full when I was a kid. The J.J. Gill, which was the spring member. That was another marathon. As we got older, things changed. The demands on people's times changed. They went from 18 holes to 9 holes, different formats, things like that. But yeah, it was unbelievable. You'd walk into that men's grow room, and it was, four guys deep trying to get a drink. It was the best. There was nothing like it. Nothing like it.
I was fortunate enough to play Metacomet once, just a few months before it closed down. It was a difficult golf course, obviously. I mean, I stink, but it was difficult. I thought it was difficult, but it was fun to be able to play it.
The golf course, I think people from Metacomet their game traveled well.
Mhm.
It wasn't the longest, obviously, and it had two short par fives,
Right.
but you never really had a flat lie. You had to use some creativity to get around the place. And I do think a lot of folks from there, their game traveled.
Do you find that nowadays with just golf courses in general that people's games don't necessarily travel a lot? Is that something that
No,
you see?
I wouldn't say that. No, I wouldn't say that. I just think that there are certain golf courses maybe it doesn't travel well from, but Metacomet happened to be one that I think it did.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You see all the different players from all these different clubs and see how they do in these state events, and you're like, and sometimes it's the same clubs over and over again that are kind of in the mix.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Talk about, I guess you told me an interesting story before we came on, and we're wondering if you would be willing to tell it. Here, obviously, we talk about this day and age of golf, and we have 4 kids that are pro or turning pro. One of them, obviously, is going to be Patrick Welch. He just played on the PGA Tour a couple weeks ago. Had a tremendous showing. I'm not sure if you could ask any more of them in that particular tournament. I just thought making the cut would have been unbelievable. But you have a really cool Patrick Welch story from when he was a kid. And it has to do with his swing, which people still talk about his swing. I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing that story here, because it's pretty cool little story.
Ed Morrow, the founder of Buttonhole, and I have been friends for years. And when Buttonhole started, he asked me to get involved, and of course I did. I jumped at the chance. Buttonhole's a phenomenal place, and has done amazing things. So one day I got a call from Ed, and he said, "You free? Can you run over to Buttonhole, meet me there? There's this young guy there hitting balls, and I want you to see him." So I go over, and there's young Patrick. I can't even imagine how old he was, 12, 11. And his mom was behind him. And I think his dad was there too. And he's hitting balls cross-handed. And I'm looking, because Ed didn't tell me what the issue was. Well, not an issue, but what was different about him.
Right.
So I'm watching him, and he's hitting this ball straight as a string, cross-handed, high. And, for a little kid, he's hitting it pretty good. So I said, "You get to play much?" We started chatting. Come to find out, my mother, who was a school nurse, knew his parents because he had a sister in one of the schools that my mother was a school nurse. And I said, "How about you come to Metacomet and play some golf?" He jumped at the chance, and I got Brad to come and play with us. And he was great. The kid, he hit it fine. He wasn't big. He didn't hit it that far, but he hit it straight, and you could see he had ability. And Brad was videoing him and sending it to the folks at TPI. And we all sat down and had lunch. And then we went out and hit balls and chatted with the dad who came to pick him up. And the folks at TPI basically said to Brad, and I'm paraphrasing, "Look, it's great. He's hitting the ball beautifully. But at this age, maybe he would think about switching back to traditional grip because he's young enough and he can." And he nor his dad were really that interested in it. And I remember chatting with his dad, and he said, "If he continues on this, he'll get some PR because he's doing it this way. This is what he knows, and this is what he's comfortable doing." And I watched him in that tournament a couple of weeks ago, thinking he's getting some coverage. He got a couple of shout outs, and they followed him play a few holes because he's this cross-handed phenom. And that's what he is. He's a phenom. His ability cannot be second guessed. I followed him a bit at the Northeast, and he hits it with everybody out there. I mean, there are obviously guys that just are crazy with their length, the 360 guys.
Yeah.
But he hits it well over 300 yards. And his putting and chipping is incredible.
Yeah, I believe his average drive on the PGA in that PGA Tour tournament, I think it was like 330.
Yeah.
something like that on they have the stats obviously when you follow it online. Yeah, I interviewed when he was just a kid about an event he was doing for the Wolf School because his brother went to the Wolf School. And so I interviewed when he was just a kid before he even went to Oklahoma. He was still at Classical. And I talked to his father and stuff. And unfortunately, obviously, his father passed away a couple years ago, which
Unfortunately, that was tragic, terribly sad.
it's too bad. 'Cause I think he was a cool guy. Just from talking to him, he would have really got into this whole run that Patrick has been on. But I just thought that was a cool story and kind of leads into the state of Rhode Island golf now.
Before we even leave Patrick for a second, is he not ranked like seventh in the? Is he ranked seventh in the country or seventh in the world amateur now? Something like that. I read.
He's ranked. So on the PGA Tour University rankings, he's ranked seventh, and the top 10 get an automatic exemption onto the Corn Ferry Tour once they finish college. Now he could have came out last year and turned pro because obviously he's been in Oklahoma. This is his 5th year, but he didn't think he was ready yet. Because I talked to him at the Northeast Amateur, and he didn't think he was ready to turn pro yet, and so he wants to go back for one more year of school, get higher up on the PGA Tour U rankings. And so far he's obviously doing that. He's ranked 7th. He'll continue to either move up or stay there, and then he'll probably get an automatic exemption on the Corn Ferry Tour next season.
Amazing.
Whenever that starts. I don't know exactly how it works. I'm learning just like everybody else.
Yeah.
But he'll be on the Corn Ferry Tour next season. So it's pretty unbelievable. He's going to be a pro. Unfortunately, the only thing is that none of us thought about it. None of us media types thought about it at the time. It was, maybe last year could be his last Northeast Amateur, which would have been too bad. Which would be too bad. But it's not. It's funny. I was thinking about this. I literally was thinking about this the other day because I think like a reporter and think content. Boy, maybe somebody should have asked him if that was going to be potentially his last Northeast Amateur. Because again, I don't know how it works. I don't know if you can play, an amateur tour circuit over the summer. I'm not sure how really that all works. I guess we'll find out. But that'd be unfortunate if that was it, and nothing. He just kind of goes off, but it is what it is. Obviously, we'll continue to follow him. But I was just thinking that, just from content perspective, like, boy, maybe that might have been his last Northeast Amateur, and nobody really even thought to ask it, including myself. But with him, obviously Davis, Will Dixon, and then just this talent that we have here in Rhode Island. Max Jackson is coming up. Mike Hamilton's had a great year, and obviously you still have guys like Bobby Leopold and Ty McCormick who are playing at a high level, very high level. What do you think the state of golf here is in Rhode Island? Is this as good as it's been, or what do you think when you look at the whole scene?
I think it's as good as it's been. These guys are incredible talents. Leopold, you mentioned, Bill Forcier.
Yeah,
doesn't play as much. Still an unbelievable talent. Hamilton, who I was able to play a practice round with last year at the Northeast. Obviously, I wasn't playing it. He was playing a practice round, and I joined him.
Right.
Incredible talent. Yeah, I think the state of the golf in Rhode Island is great. It's unfortunate that the economy in Rhode Island has had such a detrimental effect on some of the golf courses. Metacomet, obviously. Ledgemont obviously is not in the shape that it used to be. Hopefully it'll come back. So yeah, there are great golf courses here, but I don't see the growth of golf courses. And I think right now there's a lot of demand for golf courses, and supply is a bit down, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because the biggest story right now, in my opinion, in Rhode Island golf this fall, and the decision is going to be made here shortly, is the Triggs bid. Obviously, everyone's been following that story. Riga's bidding on it. Obviously, FCG Associates, which is Carl, is bidding on it, and Northeast Golf Company is bidding on it. I don't know if you had any thoughts on just the process or the bid in general, if you want to share, but just how important Triggs is to the state.
Well, it's become more and more important, right? It's an absolute gem. We had an event there this year. It was in phenomenal shape. Greens were beautiful. I read the article in the Boston Globe it does seem to make sense that maybe everybody should try to get together and try to figure something out. At the end of the day, they need to make sure that Triggs is kept Triggs, and hopefully cooler heads prevail and they figure something out to make sure that it's preserved.
Absolutely. Again, the decision is going to be made here within the next few weeks, I think, about who wins the bid. I think it's one of the underrated big stories in Rhode Island this fall, and the top story in Rhode Island golf this fall. Last thing, and then I'll get you out of here. I thought this was really cool, so I have to ask you about it. But earlier, a couple of months ago, you went down to Florida, and you teamed up with your buddy Brad Faxon, and you won the Old Marsh member guest. And he posted on Instagram. That's the only reason why I knew. And I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. Can you just talk about that as much as you can, and just how cool that was, one, to play in it, but two, to win it with Brad?
Well, complete disclosure, that was a somewhat inaccurate post. We won our flight. We did not win the whole tournament. Winning the flight took a lot of effort, for sure, because I think he's like a plus. I don't know if it was a +4, +5. So he was given a ton of shots. I don't get a ton of shots. We played our hearts out. The golf course is beautiful, and the guys were great. And in fact, he had questioned whether it was a good look for him to play in it. And the folks at the club were like, no, Brad, you have a handicap. It's hard for you to play to that handicap. I mean, he's, +4, +5. It's hard for anybody to play to that. And it seemed that the interest in the tournament peaked once the club announced that Brad was playing in it, because I understand a lot of guys were saying you're putting in some lower scores to try to get in to his flight because they wanted to play with him. So it was great. The whole tournament was played over 3 days. They did a beautiful job. And being his partner it's really relaxing to be his partner, because you really don't have to worry that much, and I actually played pretty solidly those few days, and we were a good team. I'll put it that way. We were a good team, and we won the flight, and we had a lot of fun. And this is not just we had music in the cart, and there was a little tequila flowing, and we had a lot of laughs over 3 days, and it was a lot of fun. You talk about, or we talk about, fun and how golf has evolved. Back in the day, we never played with music, ever, ever, ever. I had a pretty much back. So when I was in my 30s or early 40s, and I was getting a little bit better and found the right lesson, and I started playing with Eugene and Paul and Mike Susi. And, you put it in the ground and you want to play a match for a couple of bucks and look for a shot, and Quigley would say, play better, Darren. There's no shots. That's just what it is. You want to play this game, forget the handicaps. Let's just play better. And those guys really, Eugene in particular, really was a major cheerleader for me to get out there and try to play a little bit more competitive golf. I have 2 little kids. I have a law practice, obviously a spouse. They were big cheerleaders for me to get out there. But there was no music. There was no booze. There was none of that was flowing out there when we were playing. It was very serious. But, the guys at Metacomet, like the guys that want to moist it now, the club championships at those 2 places were crazy. I mean, the scores you had to shoot to just make the cut. It was just unbelievable, and it was very serious golf, as opposed to the member guests now, which are probably a little bit more of a social event than they are the ultimate push yourself golf event. Though everybody does still take them seriously, no question.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's interesting that you say that. I know you have to, and I'm sure you have better things to do than to talk to me, but it's interesting you say about the music stuff. Do you think it's important for golf to evolve? Because I know like all my friends, and some of them are, I'm friends with Mike Hamilton, and because I'm a member of Kirk Bryce, so I'm friends with a lot of these guys. They all play serious golf, but they also, they sometimes they listen to music while they're playing. Maybe not necessarily during like a club championship or amateur. I'm not saying that, but do you think it's important for golf, just in general as a whole, to continue to evolve with the kids in order to help grow the game? As far as, hey, if you want to play music, play maybe, again, I'm not saying to do it during the amateur or a club championship necessarily. I'm just saying in general. Do you think it's important for golf to figure out how to evolve and incorporate kind of that aspect of it?
Look, I mean, for years, golf was kind of limited, right? And I was the prototypical golfer, you know. And if you want to grow the game, I do think you have to be more open to different things. For the kids, I mean, kids love music. I think there's a way to use music actually to help you with your rhythm, with focus at times if it's certain type of music. So yeah, I do think that there's a place for things like that. I'm not a big fan of seeing that at serious events.
Right.
But yeah, absolutely. When you're out there having fun with your buddies on a Saturday afternoon, there's nothing better than playing a little music and having a few laughs. And yeah, I'm all for it. I was never for it, but I've grown to like it.
Awesome. Listen, Darren, thank you so much for your time, and
No, thank you.
it. And good luck. I don't know if you have any more tournaments left this fall season, but good luck the rest of the fall season, or maybe you're going out to Florida for another run with Brad. But thanks so much for coming on. This was a great conversation, and good luck. I'm sure I'll see you down the road.
I appreciate it, Joe. All the best.
Awesome. That's Darren Corrente. This has been the Golf News Podcast. We'll talk to you over the weekend on golfnewsri.com. Bye.